Let's take a look at the roof tool now. So if we go up a story, we're going to place the roof over the top of this, and we will show a trace reference right here in my work environment. There's a trace reference palette, and I can say show below current story. Do be aware that using the trace reference can slow things down. So I'm going to start seeing the ArchiCAD wheel beach ball here. But I think we'll get through it one way or the other. I'm going to set the reference to orange and just lighten it up so I can tell what's current versus what's behind. Now if I look at my roof tool, and for the roof tool in particular, we should always be pulling from the favorites, but in this case I'm going to go to my favorites and I'm just going to use this roof deck. It's a basic 3/4 inch deck material, wood framing. But at least now I know that the settings for this are right, and I can put this on the roof structure layer and give it a classification of roof. Now with the roof, there are it's a reference pivot point basically. So we have a roof angle and then that pivot line. The geometry method actually is shown here in the roof settings. The construction method is not, however. So that's sort of their use of the word geometry method or term of geometry method is inconsistent with the roof tool. So really the construction method is what's unique in the info box. The geometry method does appear here and there. The single plane geometry, you could see it basically just zeroes out that multi-plane geometry option. But the single plane geometry is very, very useful, especially when roof designs get more complicated than the multi-plane geometry can handle. For the most part, this multi-plane geometry is going to work really well. You just set the roof slope, usually in inches per foot or feet per feet. You can also do percentage or degree, which is more useful for site elements such as roads, driveways, garage slabs, or even some like porches, decks, things like that where you have like a degree angle that you're trying to hit, or a lot of times driveways and civil are measured in percentage of slope. In this case, we're just going to say it's a 3 and 12 roof. And then we have the eave offset. This is one of the huge advantages to the multi-plane roof over the single plane roof. And I'll try to really quickly demonstrate each of these methods here. But in this case, just the multi-plane roof, I'm going to say that this is 4 and 12 for the roof overhang. Now if I say OK, it's as simple as setting the geometry method. In this case, I'm just going to do a rectangle to go from my column to my face of stud that I put over here. And then it's going to want to dump to a different story. Now one of the easiest things to do here is just to go to your 3D view. That's F4 on most people's work environments. Wait for it to update here. There's that roof. So what we can do is we can drop that down to tie into that top of plate. Let's put that on the top of plate right here. And that can always be adjusted later. But I want to make sure that this is visible on, well, it's called my second story. Typically I would rename that. Right now it's saying first floor. If I put that on my second floor, what you'll see is it'll jump way up. So what I want to do is maintain this position, but put it on the second story so it lives there. So you can right click, relink home story, and second floor. And now its home story is the second floor, but its position is maintained as the same. And that works for almost any 3D element in ArchiCAD for repositioning. So now I can see this roof right here is a basic hip roof in the model. Now if I wanted to adjust this or redefine it, reform it a little bit, the multi-plane roof does allow for a little bit of complexity. So for example, I can say that I have pitch 1 and pitch 2, and maybe the distance from pitch 1 to pitch 2 is like 1.5 feet. And pitch 2 goes to 6 and 12. So if we look at that here, you can see this pitch 2 pops up right there. Let's take a look at what that means here in 3D. Give it a second here. So I've isolated that out using the F4 key on the keyboard, and I can see that pitch break happens right here. Now I can even get a little bit more sculptural and maybe put some gable end vents as you would see in the practice exercise. So let's show you how to do that here. So in the roof settings, again, Command T to get to the roof settings. I'm going to add an additional pitch break, and let's say that this is another 1.5 feet up. And you can always redefine that height if it turns out to not be right. I do know that from this point to that point, all the way to the ridge is still 6 and 12, so I'm not going to adjust that. And here's this other roof piece right here. Sometimes you need to actually drop in some line work, polylines or hot spots or something to indicate how far down that is. So if I know that my gable end is, say, 8 feet further down the roof, that's where I want that break to happen. I can then place a line as a reference. And on the pet palette, I can use this option right here. It's to vertically offset that pitch break, and it'll shift it all the way around. Now using the pet palette again, I click on that ridge node, and I can offset that ridge node over to here. And then I can do the same thing here. So really quickly, I've added a couple of gable end pieces into this roof. If we look at that in 3D again, and again, it's slow because of the trace reference. There's that roof plane with the gable ends really quickly added in there. It gets to be pretty sculptural pretty fast. Let's throw in a couple of shed dormers on the faces of these just to show you kind of how quickly this can work. So if you select the roof and you want to punch in an opening in the roof similar to what we were looking at with the slab, you can use the subtraction option. And notice what happens. I clicked on that blue line right here. If I draw in a square here, it slopes that inward, kind of creating inverted geometries sloping to that shape. That may be useful in some cases, but in this case, we just want to punch a hole in the roof itself. So instead of clicking and activating the pet palette by the blue reference line here, I'm going to click on the edge of the roof itself. And here I can click and say that I've got a roof opening that is, let's say it's 12 feet by, that should be X 12 feet, Y negative 14 feet maybe. Let's just do that. So just like with the slab, I can then grab this and isolate it out. Notice that none of the end or corner nodes on the outside of the roof are selected. It's just this piece right here. So I can see that it's a little offset, so I'm going to use Command D and drag from the center point to the center point there, and then it's centered up. If I drag from here to the ridge, I can see that it's 1 and 3/64, or sorry, 12 and 3/64. So I can move that 3/64 of an inch up, and then that's exactly 12 inches off my ridge. I can mirror copy, that's Command Option M, and copy that over that ridge, and then I get an opening there as well. Now what I can do is set this to single plane roof, and let's not worry too much about what's going on here. I'm going to set the reference line for this at the top of that roof opening, and it's going to slope up towards the ridge, but it's actually going to extend down over this piece. So then I can set the slope of this to be, maybe it's like 2 and 12, and offset all edges out with the pet palette. Let's say it has a 1 foot roof over it, not 1 inch, sorry about that. Offset all roof edges out 1 foot, and then grab this guy right here, pull it back down. Let's mirror that across, and then we'll review this in 3D. One of the most important things in ArchiCAD is to not get sort of tunnel vision or fixated on one view type. It's really easy to lay this out in floor plan and say, hey, my roof plan looks great, but then the whole 3D doesn't work. So it's really useful to place temporary sections, to cycle between 2D, 3D, floor plan, section, and elevation. In this case, I'm going to bisect that area with a section marker and open that with the current view settings. And then I can see right here, there are those shed roofs that I put in. I can then drag those up and snap them into place here. So there's a basic building section with my roof already laid out, sort of dialed in. I would have to add some additional walls to include those gable end pieces and sort of probably fine tune this gable end edge here. Maybe that has a 12-inch overhang as well. And this side. So you can sort of get really creative in terms of sculpting this multi-plane roof. It does hit a point where it's no longer really viable to keep working with it. If it got any more complicated than this, or occasionally we'll put a roof covering on this and you start getting breaks in your roof coverings and it just doesn't work out, what you can do is you can right-click and split that to single plane roofs and say okay, but you can see where that pitch break happens. Now there's this additional roof. So you would want to combine these roofs and eliminate the duplicate. You can do that with the plus option here and just hold space to magic wand and then delete that redundant roof right there. So you can actually quickly form a roof with a multi-plane roof and then convert it to single plane roofs to clean it up later. Starting from scratch with single plane roofs is also an option. And let's take a look at that tool right now. We probably won't go through the full process of that, but let's just let's select these guys and move them out of the way for now. Maybe it's like 50 feet up or something, just to, let's go another 50 feet, get it out of the way. So moving it a set distance means that I can move it back when I'm done. So here I'm going to set the single plane roof. I'm going to use the rectangular geometry, and I am going to make sure that my roof slope is set before I start placing. In this case, I might want that pivot point to actually be the inside face of structure. That's a very common pivot line for bird's mouth roofs. The first thing I'm placing on a single plane roof is that rotational line. And then, just like we looked at with those shed dormers, this is the direction that's sloping up towards the ridge. And then I'm going to draw this into the outside face of structure. Let's just snap to the face of structure here. Now, what you can do is be really precise with this. So this is one of the advantages over the multi-plane roof, is that you can say that this pitch break happens 2 feet in from here. I can pull this roof overhang out 4 feet, for example. I can mirror this across this corner, Command Option M, and start sculpting this out. I can then set this roof, if I pull this over to here, so that pivot line is going to happen right where the top of this roof is, and I can say that this is a 6 and 12, so we'll say that that's 6 and 12 slope. And let's go ahead and mirror a copy of this. This little tick mark indicates the center of that wall. So that's pivoted right there. Again, with this, you can mirror it across this junction, Command Option M. And it's going to be pretty obvious here in a second why I'm just sort of throwing these in here in floor plan, because what I can do is get really sculptural and start trimming these together, and I usually do that in 3D. So I'm just sort of preliminarily placing these in floor plan. Now if I isolate this stuff out, let's go to our marquee here, isolate out the building again, F4 to isolate around that marquee. It looks like a mess, but this really quickly becomes a roof once I start getting these in the right spot and cropping them out to each other. So these roofs, dragging vertically, Command D, align at that point. Putting the pivot line right there means that if these roofs ever change slope, if the design process said we're going to look at these as 8 and 12, they're pivoting on that point, so I don't have to raise or lower or elevate them, provided that this lower roof stays where it's at. So we're sort of minimizing, not eliminating what we're trimming or adjusting. So now to trim these roofs to each other, it's really as simple as selecting the roof that needs to be trimmed to. So this is sort of the target piece. And then I'm holding Command and clicking on what will become the hip edge of that roof. And I'm trimming that one and that one to this roof. I can then select those roofs and trim this one to it. So once you get it started, it's really just as simple as Command click, Command click. And some of these have to be done one at a time, so it is a bit more tedious. But it is possible to trim these out to each other really quickly once you get the hang of it. And it's not just extending backwards. For example, if this roof, let's pull this to here, I need to find where this joins as a hip to that roof. I can Command click there. And it works for hips, it works for ridges, it works for valleys. So here I can Command click this up to here and this up to here. I can then grab this roof and add a node on the pet palette to that point right here, and then grab this edge and pull it out. So the single plane roof, you could see, does give you a lot of flexibility and sculptural ability to sort of shape and form these roofs. It is more tedious, it is more work. You know, little changes like changing the eave overhang on these roofs, for example, is quite a bit more difficult. So if, for example, I knew that this roof needs to extend out another foot or extend back a foot, using the push-pull command, it doesn't even necessarily work in 3D very well because it's usually a horizontal projection that we're looking for. So you have to actually right-click and say Editing Plane, and if it doesn't give you a horizontal option, you have to say Pick Plane, pick a horizontal surface, and then say pull this back a foot. And then you have to go through and pull all of the rest of them back as well. or you can make that change in floor plan. Regardless, you could see it's not just a one-stop shop for adjusting something as simple as a roof overhang for the single plane roof, as opposed to the multi-plane roof. We'll pull that up over here. That's right, we split that out, where with the multi-plane roof, you can go to the settings and say that the roof overhang universally for this whole roof is 4 feet or 3 feet or 2 feet or whatever it needs to be. Gives you the ability to adjust that. But it really depends on the complexity of the roof. Anytime you have multiple plate heights, anytime you have complex trimmed dormers and things like that, the multi-plane roof, you cannot use that command-click trim to trim roofs to roofs. So joining complex roofs with the multi-plane roof is a little bit too finicky, and we would have to split to single-plane roofs or start modeling from scratch with single-plane roofs.